Hello and welcome once again to White Lotus of Light educational series. Today I'm going to be talking about one of the unusual and unique features of Jyotish, that is Vedic astrology. Jyotish means literally in Sanskrit the science of light, which I think is a great way of describing it, although it truly is a mix of a science and an art at the same time. There's the science of the various rules that you have to apply, and then there's the art of interpretation, decoding the symbolism. And so one of the major differences between Vedic astrology or Jyotish and Western Tropical astrology is that Western astrology tends to focus on the internal space and on emotional and spiritual reactions, and the way in which the soul grows and the personality develops. Whereas, and that's because of the emphasis in the West on linear progressive time and also free will. Whereas in India, where karma is considered a law of nature, I tend to agree with that actually. They focused less on personality, which they felt was more like up to you, and more on fated events. Especially things such as having children or getting married, getting a job, how much wealth you would have, things like this were the main focus of interest. And so one of the big differences between Jyotish and Western astrology is both systems have the natal chart, which is your birth chart, as you probably heard. And if you're interested in astrology, you very likely have had done, at least on a free site or something like that. And that gets into where the science aspect is insufficient, right? Just having a computer program crunch all the numbers. You can use it as a frame of reference, but you really need to go into the symbolic interpretation that requires a human mind, frankly, to understand in order to get the really deep info. And so there's a natal chart in both systems, but one of the unique things about Jyotish is that in the northern Indian system, well, actually, in either system, either the northern or southern Indian reckoning, there's the idea of the Navamsa, and the Navamsa is seen as the marriage chart in South India, but in northern India, where I tend to think Vedic astrology originated, I think that it was a resurrection of actually Atlantean or a reformation of Atlantean era astrology that was then updated in the time of the rishis, who laid down the rules of Vedic astrology for the Kali Yuga, which we're in. And you can look into the Yuga system more. In fact, I'll put a card up there that talks about that. I talk about that greater on my channel. But basically, during this era, which is actually rapidly coming to a close, they had to reformulate like how sort of karmas ripen. And so the Navamsa is considered the marriage chart in the south of India, but in the north of India, it's considered the second half of life, post 40. And so you would look at the natal chart in order to determine a person's start in life and kind of the things that form their character and the lessons that they have to learn. And then you would look at the Navamsa to see the second half of life post 40. Rarely that can be in the West, the modern Western world, or just the modern technological world, however you want to look at it, because even India nowadays tends to follow more Western rules and less so classical Vedic Indian rules around marriage. And so unless your marriage was to like a millionaire or a billionaire, or you had to move countries or you had to move states, some kind of very, very significant life change, likely your Navamsa is activated as a modern person in the modern technological world when you turn 40. So what that is sometimes described in North India is as the natal chart is the tree, right? Like the tree that grows up, the fruit tree that grows up, and then the Navamsa is the fruit of the tree. And so you can have a really ugly tree and a very sweet fruit, or you can have a beautiful tree and a really bitter, nasty fruit that doesn't taste very good, or you could have, they could both be beautiful, or they could both be kind of bad, right? It really depends. And since this is a mapping of the soul's karma and destiny, there can be any combination of like good and bad or whatever. And so there are some very extreme cases of this where people are like very famous, under 40 and very wealthy, and then they just kind of lose it all by the time they're in their early 40s. This happens to a lot of like child stars and so forth, but it can also happen in reverse. And so a very classic example of this, which I'm going to share now, is the chart of George W. Bush, the former president, the president who oversaw 9/11, right? So if you look at his Rossi or natal chart, I mean, it's not terrible. I mean, he was very wealthy, right? And he had a very powerful father, and you can see that there with the ninth Lord Jupiter aspecting its own ninth house, a father who's really going to provide for him. He even has a Gajakasari yoga, which certainly carries over. By the way, a lot of your natal chart stuff will carry over kind of with momentum into your Navamsa. And so he has a Gajakasari yoga, that's Moon and Jupiter conjoined. Yogas are conjoined. Yugas are actually, it means technically Gajakasari is that this Moon and Jupiter are in mutual angular houses. And so in this case, they're conjoined, and the first house is considered both an angle and a trine. And so the Gajakasari yoga is achieved. So yogas are yokes of destiny or certain planetary combinations that show certain character traits and certain like karmic experiences you're going to have. And so as you can see here, the Gajakasari yoga means famous and virtuous. I think we could argue about the virtue part, right? But the way that generally translates in actuality is not necessarily virtue, but it has a lot to do with charisma and how well received you are by other people. And George W. Bush, for all his many faults, is very notably extremely charismatic. And so that clearly carried over. But if you look around at this chart, I mean, like, you got Saturn conjunct Mercury, and Saturn rules 7th and 8th house, and Mercury rules the 12th house and the 3rd house, and then it's got Venus in there, 4th and 11th Lord. And, you know, it's just like that Saturn is really harming both the Venus and the Mercury, and it's just not super strong. Mars here is 5th Lord, you know, and also 10th Lord. It's there in the 2nd house, so he has the ability to earn a lot of money potentially. But just like this chart, while decent, you know, it's not terrible. It's just not that strong, especially when you have the 2nd Lord of Sun going into the 12th house. That's really going to hurt income. So any gains he has here from the 5th and 10th Lord being in the 2nd house are somewhat erased by the fact that he's going to, you know, end up spending it all in debt. He's going to spend more than he earned, which I'm pretty confident was true of his first 40 years of life. And so anyways, this chart, I mean, it's not terrible, but it's also not super strong. It's just not kind of the chart you would expect to see for a president of the United States. And you can just see kind of like, if you just kind of do a count here, a general look at it, you know, there's like a fair amount of yogas, but it's not like extraordinary. But now let's look at his Navamsa. And when you switch to his Navamsa and look at the yogas, just take a look. Boom, you actually have to scroll down. It comes off, and you'll notice becomes a king, Raja Yoga, right? So in the 2nd half of life chart, you have, let's see, 7, 8, 9, 10. In the 10th house of war and leadership and government, you have Mars, the 1st Lord, right? 1st and also 6th Lord. You have Rahu, the North Node, so destiny, right? Like unfolding karmas, especially material karmas. You have Jupiter, Lord of the 2nd and the 5th. You have Moon, Lord of the 10th, Lord of the 9th in the 10th. And then you have Saturn, Lord of the 3rd and the 4th. Saturn shows like rulership and so forth. And if you just look, there's so many yogas, and there's like becomes a king, power and authority, successful achievements, a king's friend, important person in a king's court, victorious over enemies, wealthy, intelligent, long-lived, and he was very victorious. And so, I mean, some of these you have to take with a grain of salt, because of course you have to update modern situations for like the ancient Vedic text. For instance, they might say you have a really strong 4th Lord, and the 4th Lord is vehicle. So it might say, literally, if you have a certain powerful 4th Lord, it might say rides an elephant. And unless you work for Barnum and Bailey Circus, you're pretty unlikely to ride an elephant, right? So I would translate to that like owns a modern Tesla self-driving car, or owns a Lamborghini or something like that. And so some of these you have to look at them, and you have to just kind of update them for like modern times, right? But you do see like strong and cunning, bold, leads a large army, you know, and it's happening here. The main thing is it's happening here in the 10th house, which is leadership, government, career, and military. And you have Mars there. So he's going to be a military's leader in sense of self. And he sees himself, and he did, I'm a wartime president. Right. Well, yeah, he likes that because Mars, you know, which is related to war and aggression and violence, is there in the 10th house. And that's it achieves Dikbala, or directional strength there. And you also have this ninth Lord Moon, so help from father, right? Powerful father. And the ninth and 10th Lord are together. That forms like a really powerful, the most powerful Raja Yoga. He's got Jupiter and Moon. That Gaja Kasari Yoga carries over, and it's even better now because it's in the 10th house. And then you have that Rahu, so destiny, right? And so when Bush was under 40, he was pretty famously not very successful in the world, right? It was something that really bothered his father. However, once he turned 40, he very quickly owned the Texas Rangers base. First, Arbusto Oil. His daddy helped him get Arbusto Oil, which he then turned around and sold for a pretty big profit and a sweetheart deal. Then he became the owner, or part owner, majority owner, I think, of I want to say it's the Texas Rangers. It's the Texas baseball team. And then he becomes governor of Texas. And by the time he was in his mid-40s, like me, he was president of the United States. And you can really see that dichotomy in his chart, where the first half of life isn't quite, you know, it's notable. There's some wealth and power there, which was true, but it's not extraordinary like you'd expect to see of a president of the United States. But that second half of life chart is, right? And it just shows this meteoric rise to fame. And so I'm going to show you another, this is a friend of mine who is also an astrologer, and he also has a very dichotomous chart. And if you see here, you'll notice this first chart, like it's got Mercury in Pisces, which is actually fallen. It has Jupiter and Moon conjunct Ketu in the 8th. So you can see there's like psychic potential and interest in astrology. But it's not super strong. The only really notable thing about this natal chart is he does have a stationary direct Saturn in the 11th house. So that's 5th Lord, brings forth a lot of past life karma. And it's stationary direct, which is the most powerful state for a planet. So this guy is likely to have like powerful children in the future and very powerful friends. But overall, you know, it's not a super notable chart. But then watch what happens when this guy gets into his second half of life. Look at that. It just like skyrockets up. And it's not as you know, powerful as like George Bush's chart, but it is like shows a very powerful chart. And let's look here. So this guy is a friend of mine who's also an astrologer. And you'll see that here in his second house, he has Venus and Jupiter. So the Lord of the 8th and 11th, Jupiter, the first Lord Venus and 6th Lord Venus. And then directly across from that in the 8th house, right, which includes astrology. And remember, there was some 8th house action here in the first half of life. And he was interested in astrology and the occult when he was younger, but he really leaned into it when he got into his 40s, and things really changed for him. And so then there's the 2nd and 5th Lord Mercury here, and there's the 4th Lord Sun. So 4th and 5th Lord, and this guy is like, he's not like world famous or anything, but he's a famous astrologer. I'm keeping his identity secret just to protect him. But he is like destined to actually probably become at some point fairly world famous. And there's lots of like what are called, there's 5 out of 10 possible dana or wealth yogas along this. And he has told me that he really struggled in the first half of his life. He didn't have a lot of income. He really struggled with finding like his career and finding his dharma. But then not too terribly long after he turned 40, he really started to lean into his 8th house, which is another thing I can get into in another thing about how to hack your chart and lean into the strengths of especially the so-called negative houses like the 6th, 8th, and 12th, the trick, or the 3, the negative houses, but how you can lean into the neutral or positive characteristics of those 3 houses and avoid therefore some of the negatives, because now you're experiencing your karma consciously. So you also see he has a exalted Mars, which is Lord of the 7th and the 12th, in the 9th house. And so you would expect that he would have a powerful, beautiful, and intelligent partner, and someone who probably exemplifies Mars in some place, like an athlete or something along those lines. As it turns out, he's getting married, and his partner is an Aries, right? So Mars rules Aries, so that's perfect. And exalted in the 9th house, and that person's like, she's really smart and assertive and aggressive, and like runs her own quite successful business, and very much shows that exalted Mars. And whereas in his first half of life, you'll notice that his 7th lord is Jupiter, and it's in the 8th house. Like, he was divorced under 40, and he had some really negative experiences very often with relationships under 40, except for when he was with women who were spiritual, and then he had okay relationships, right? Or even sometimes good, but mostly negative relationships. But you would expect that over 40 that he would have a much better relationship, and indeed he does now, which is fantastic. Rooting for him. And so also his Saturn here, the 9th and 10th lord, so career and father, or just like authorities and conservative people, and just overall luck. That's still, it's still stationary direct, it carries over, and also the moon is Vargamata, and that carries over, it stays in the same sign. So that Saturn mixing with his Mars is really like his career and his wife's career, and they actually work together on certain things, and are working more and more. Like, they're going to be able to help one another in career, and like just the wife is actually empowered by him and his career, and she empowers him in his career, right? So it goes both ways. And so you can see how this guy is going to be a very, very successful astrologer, once he turns 40 and begins to do that. And indeed, he became a professional astrologer to some degree, I guess, in his mid to late 30s. And then in his 40s, he decided to really, really go into that and make that his primary career, and not kind of have one foot in and one foot out anymore. He just really went for it. And sure enough, his life, according to him, has just completely taken off post 40. It's night and day, and it's just a quite powerful chart. I mean, if you look, it's not, right? So I mean, like, yeah, it's more powerful, but we are talking about someone who's going to be famous throughout history versus someone who does have a real chance at some level of national, or perhaps even international fame. If you see, I mean, it's quite strong. It's missing like probably 4 compared to Bush, or 5, but I mean, like, that's really strong. And like, compare it to this guy's first half of life, right? And so I got his permission to do this, as long as I didn't show like his birth date or anything. But you can see that there's like quite a lot of weakness in this first half of life chart, and there's just like a huge change. And my friend reports that his life has just been like, has gotten just vastly better post 40. And so those are 2 examples of the power of knowing your Navamsa and natal chart. And you might say, oh, well, if it's just going to happen, what does it matter? Well, first of all, it's nice for planning, and it's nice for lots of things. But in my friend's case, and I actually helped him with this chart and pointed some of this out to him years ago, and kind of gave him a pep talk back when he was under 40, and was like, you just wait till your 40s, brother. It's gonna take off, And he was wanting to believe, but he was a little skeptical. But sure enough, like, his 40s have been just gangbuster. And so you can see how, I was going to say, I really encouraged him to lean more into those 8th house indications, and to like, get out there and practice astrology, and otherwise delve into the metaphysical and other 8th house indicators. And so he did so. And by doing so, he started experiencing those karmas consciously rather than negatively. And so he credits me to some degree, with giving him that pep talk that really helped him have the confidence to make that leap. And so that's the difference between the natal and the Navamsa, and it's one of the biggest differences between Jyotish and Western astrology. And I have found it to be a very useful and extremely powerful tool. And so thank you so much for watching this. And if you'd like to book a session with me so we can go deep on your chart and give you some guidance, especially in these wild and challenging times, I would love to. whitelotusoflight.com, and then go to the consultation page, and you can read all my reviews there, and then look at the various packages and find one that works for you. And I'll be including that link down below. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this informational video, and I hope to hear from you. Thank you. Bye.